This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here he is, the host of the podcast, AWR Hawkins.
Folks, welcome to Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart News podcast focused on guns, gun rights, the Second Amendment. We're going to come right out of the chute today with our guest because our first guest is that important. Dick Heller used to work in IT, and he realized that in Washington, D.C., he couldn't have a gun unless he worked for the government. So he transitioned to take a job with the government so that they would give him a gun. But he soon learned that via D.C.'s gun ban, he couldn't have a gun at home. You may recognize his name from the renowned Supreme Court decision, District of Columbia v. Heller, from 2008. The 10th anniversary of that decision is June 26th, 2018, today. That's today. And it was 10 years ago today that Scalia-led court reaffirmed, and it's important to say this, they reaffirmed, they didn't discover, they reaffirmed. The Second Amendment protects an individual right, not a collective right. The ramifications of this decision are extraordinary. So it's an honor to have Mr. Heller with us. Dick, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you can just call me that Heller dude. It's fine.
I'll just call you that Heller dude. Listen, it is so awesome to have you with us. What led up to you bringing that case? How did that case emerge? It's been so important in the lives of gun owners. What birthed that case?
You know, that's a good question, and I like to refer to it as the gun fight. The gun fight started in, interestingly, coincidentally, only 200 years to the week of the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July the 4th, 1776. I moved into my house, and I settled in my house in D.C. somewhere around June 26th, and I moved in maybe June the 1st, or July the 1st or July the 4th, somewhere in there. And I just figured that out the other day. I said, 1776, 1976, oh my God, OMG, that's 200 years. So, karma or God works in funny ways, who knows. But when I moved in, my favorite program was Matt Dillon, Gunsmoke. And I went out and bought my very first firearm. I was in my early 30s, or late 20s, I forgot. And that was in July of 76. And they passed a law that took effect in October the 76 that said, throw your gun away, turn it in, or if you're caught, you go to jail. And I had this magnificent piece of art called the Buntline 22 caliber Magnum that was just a work of art. If you're a gun lover, you could understand how Western guns with a 9-inch barrel can be considered a work of art. And I just knew we had to make another option. Jail, trash, or turn it in were just not enough options. So we had to make our own option.
Well, you made a good option. I know that ban was thrown out as a result of District of Columbia v. Heller. I'll never forget the day the ruling was handed down. I can remember it because no one knew how it was going to go, not from our end anyway.
Absolutely. Nobody knew. People were asking me, Dick, how would it feel if your name got to be synonymous with losing our Second Amendment? And I thought about it. I said, yeah, the 6-year-old kids would come up and kick me in the leg, when I'm walking down the street and say, thanks, mister, for losing our Second Amendment rights. And then their dog would come up and pee on my leg to add insult to injury.
But as it works out, they should be buying you a meal or a drink or whatever it is you prefer because victory was secured. You look at that ruling. What that ruling does is it reaffirms, of course, we've already said, it reaffirms that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. That's crucial. But it also reaffirms that the federal government, and of course this was versus a federal district, but it reaffirms in that way that the federal government can't interfere with this right to the degree that the district did. And so if you look at that, though, it seems like we still have a number of gun controls that some people might say, look, these controls would violate Heller. They would violate a Heller test. Has it occurred to you over these last 10 years that as great as this decision is and was, it has not been applied as well as it could to gun controls that are robbing our freedom in different places around the country.
Well, as an adjunct member of the House Second Amendment Caucus, we invited Alan Gura, the terrific attorney that was first chair on that case at the Supreme Court. And what he just told the Second Amendment Caucus, he says, there's a number of circuits that just ignore Heller.
Right.
And what they do is they're using our tax dollars to make these judicial decisions, and then we've already paid our taxes, and now we are taxed again because we have to pull on our resources and our time and our heart muscle to go fight them that are using our tax money to infringe on our rights.
Right.
So we're getting a double whammy. So we have to, well, don't get me started.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Now listen, Mr. Heller, you have some insight here that other people just simply don't have, and that's, you've brought up something I want to ask you. You know, we have a great new justice in Gorsuch, thanks to Trump. But do you believe, as you listen to what you just talked about, how certain circuits are just absolutely ignoring Heller, do you believe what's crucial now is that during the Trump years we get one more justice on the Supreme Court? Is that what it's going to take to turn the tide so that Heller is applied properly? And if I'm wrong, just tell me I'm wrong, but I'm just asking you.
Two things. Number one, there is a case, I think it's Young versus Hawaii, that's perking, and I hope that we're able to get another Trump appointee at the Supreme Court before that case might be granted certiorari or acceptance by the court, because it causes a circuit split, and therefore the court has to hear it. It has no option. So I really think we need a minimum of one. Two would be a little more comfortable, and then let everybody pull the trigger and bring their cases to the judicial system. And the second thing is that this is not going to stop until we can find a way to pierce that veil of sovereign immunity that all municipalities hide behind when they do things that they know are just abjectly immoral and illegal. For instance, when Scalia read his decision, it wasn't 30 minutes later outside the courthouse that Mayor Fenty wrinkled up his nose and said, "You have your guns, but we have control." And they knew damn well that everything, all those regulations that they passed were illegal. For instance, there's 16 hurdles that we had to jump through. So we had Heller 2 and case Heller 3, where we challenged them, and we won half of the issues, and the other half will remand it back for review. But we really don't want to review them until we have an understanding Supreme Court majority, big majority.
I understand. I believe the last year of Trump have taught us this, and that is that even though we had Gorsuch, there have been a number of cases that the Supreme Court has passed on hearing that are Second Amendment related, and I'm convinced they passed on hearing it because we are still one justice short of knowing that we can defend that Second Amendment as it should be defended. And as you make the point, we may be 2 justices short. But I believe that's one of the reasons we've seen the Supreme Court pass on some cases that seem like they would be obvious cases for them to hear.
You know, you're absolutely right, because in my speeches I list 4 of them in particular that I could see no rhyme or reason why they would be passed on. And I think maybe your evaluation is even better than mine. I was thinking that there was a weak judge in there, but I think you have to have 4. It's called the rule of 4. You have to have 4 judges that accept a case. And we didn't even have 4. That got me scared. Gee, maybe there's some weak links in there. And one of my lawyers said it was Alito. And then in the Caetano case, Massachusetts, Alito was not happy with the, I think it was 7-0 decision for the plaintiff to own a stun gun. Alito wrote a concurring or supplemental decision, and the essence was one sentence. It said, any weapon. in defense of your life may not be classified as unconstitutional. Now, that's a powerful supporter of the Second Amendment there.
Sure
so we don't know if there's a weak link or they just agreed the timing was not yet right.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more question. You know, the Heller decision in 2008 was followed by the McDonald v. Chicago decision in 2010. And when you take those two decisions together, we not only have the federal government reminded that they can't interfere with the Second Amendment to the degree that they did, but we have state and municipalities reminded. But the problem, Dick, is look, if these people aren't paying attention, these states and municipalities, look at California, look at New Jersey, and they're doing what they want. Does the McDonald decision face the same future as the Heller decision, that until we get these new justices, we're just going to basically have to bide our time? Is that where we are?
Well, I can say this. Number one, the Heller decision basically broke the mold of silence and gave, in the number I have, 2 years after Scalia's magnificent decision, I was shocked to find that there were 75 additional gun cases in the federal court. Shocked. I couldn't believe it. My jaw dropped open. And then a couple years later, I find there was 300. And now, from what I'm finding, it sounds like there's in the range of 1,000 patriotic citizens have stood up and roared and said enough. But those are people whose basically heart muscles have been strained by that extra stress of having to fight the monster just to try to regain their rights.
Well, you know what? Maybe we'll hit critical mass. Wouldn't it be great if we hit critical mass about the same time we get another justice on the Supreme Court? That would be phenomenal.
In summary, I think what I would like to say is we're really winning because in 1986, before I was a cop, I saw a 2-little paragraph sentence in the Washington Post that said, Florida is implementing concealed carry. And I said, oh, this is very interesting. And I watched it to develop so that now with the Brian Rand decision in D.C., we have every single state and territory and colony has some sort of concealed carry application, whether or not it's full-blown enough to suit the citizens, but at least we've gone from 0 to 50+.
That's phenomenal. Dick, thanks for making time to be with us, and congratulations on this win. But to our listeners, be sure you understand the depth of this. District of Columbia v. Heller. Get on the internet, look up the majority opinion on this, and read it and understand what happened. It was absolutely amazing. And Dick,
may I make one more comment?
Sure you can.
Everybody can do something. If everybody would just do the little thing called vote, every gun owner would just vote, we would tear these restrictions apart.
That's it. There's nothing to add to that. Listen to what Dick is saying, folks. In November 2018 is fast approaching. Plan to vote, and vote for people who love the Second Amendment. Don't vote for those people who say they love it but seek restrictions. Vote for people who love the Second Amendment and want to defend it. Dick, thanks for making time to be with us today. And again, thank you so much for bringing that suit. And God bless you for your love for this country.
My pleasure, and be safe.
I will. Folks, you're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlowe.
Jeannie in Pennsylvania.
I think we've gotten away from what we really hired him to do, which is draining the swamp. If you look at the real picture of draining a swamp, you go in and you take all the water out of it. What does it leave? It leaves the gunk. He cannot get rid of the gunk. We have to get rid of the gunk. Everything he's doing, he's lowering the water so we can see who needs to go. The only way they can go is if we vote them out.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart News podcast, where we focus on guns and gun rights, the Second Amendment. That talk with Dick Heller was phenomenal. He's a figure in American history, really is. He may not realize it. Maybe he does. You heard what he brought to the table as we spoke. This is a man who brought a case against the District of Columbia and beat them, had their gun control abolished. Not all of it, but the gun ban. It's incredible. And again, He achieved this via District of Columbia v. Heller. The decision was handed down 10 years ago today. And after he and I spoke during the break, I'm sitting there thinking, maybe the smart thing to do is just give a quick summary of Heller. Heller, when it was handed down, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, other papers, they went ballistic. They said that the Supreme Court had created an individual right to keep and bear arms with the decision, that they created it. In other words, the establishment media immediately tried to cast the Heller decision in a light that suggested that the court in 2008 created our right to keep and bear arms, that it hadn't existed before that. They suggested that prior to 2008, our right was a collective right that depended upon us meeting certain threshold of service with the militia in order to keep and bear arms. I know none of that makes sense because it goes against common sense, but that's the story they pushed. In other words, they held that from 1791, when the Second Amendment was ratified, from 1791 to 2008, the establishment media tried to tell us that during that time period, everybody understood it's a collective right dependent upon militia service. Well, no, nobody understood that because that makes no sense. That's not how it played out in real time. So no one understood that. And matter of fact, we reject that. What happened in 2008 with Heller that is very important, and I stressed this as I was talking to Dick, what happened with Heller, they did not create a right to keep and bear arms that's individual in nature. They did not create that. They did not discover that. They simply reaffirmed that. I cannot say it enough. All they did is said, no, here's what the founding fathers were saying. Now, if you read Heller, and I would invite you to read it. If you would go to Google and do a search for the Heller decision, you can find a PDF and just read it. It's lengthy, but it's worth it. And what you'll see is that they go from colonial time to the national period to the pre-Civil War era to the post-Civil War era, and they trace the founding fathers' views on the right to keep and bear arms. They trace jurisprudence on the right to keep and bear arms in America throughout each of those time periods, all the way up to today. And as they do this, what you see is the commonality between all those periods is that the right to keep and bear arms was an individual right. Just by going over these things, they make the case, okay? I want to give you an example. You'll hear now, this is the latest ploy of the left. For those of you paying attention, you know this. The left is now trying to say that the Second Amendment was written to protect slavery. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Really, it is the dumbest thing. But they'll say the Second Amendment was written to protect slavery, to help keep slaves unarmed. Well, guess what? The facts are 100% against that. In post-Civil War America, one of the examples that the Supreme Court used in Heller was to show how blacks' Second Amendment rights were routinely being violated, that they were being disarmed, and that this went against their constitutional rights. I mean, this one example, to me, this one example is sufficient almost by itself to justify the entire decision in Heller. I'm just going to read directly from Heller. This is going to take me a couple of minutes, but bear with me. It's worth hearing. Again, reading from the majority opinion in District of Columbia v. Heller. Blacks were routinely disarmed by southern states after the Civil War. Those opposed to these injustices frequently stated that they infringed blacks' constitutional right to keep and bear arms. Needless to say, the claim was not that blacks were being prohibited from carrying arms in an organized state militia. A report of the Commission of the Freedmen's Bureau in 1866 said plainly, quote, "The civil law of Kentucky prohibits the colored man from bearing arms. Their arms are taken from them by the civil authorities. Thus, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, as provided in the Constitution, is infringed." Unquote. You hear what they stress there? They stress that these rights are taken away apart from any recognition that these black men were or were not in the militia. The role of the militia played no part at all. They simply wanted to be sure these black men were unarmed. These freed men were unarmed. All right? Now, a congressional report addressed this matter. It's included in the Heller decision. I'm going to read from that report one more quote, and this is a quote. In some parts of South Carolina, armed parties are, without proper authority, engaged in seizing all firearms found in the hands of free men. Such conduct is in clear and direct violation of their personal rights as guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States, which declares that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The freedmen of South Carolina have shown by their peaceful and orderly conduct that they can be safely trusted with firearms, and they need them to kill game for subsistence and to protect their crops from destruction by birds and animals. That's a report that was rendered by the Joint Committee on Reconstruction. Folks, do you understand this? Listen to that one line again. Such conduct is in clear and direct violation of their personal rights as guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States. So this is one of myriad examples that the Supreme Court used to show that far from what the left says, it's always been recognized, always, that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. It's not a collective right. It's not based on people meeting, jumping through certain hoops, doing this and doing that. It is a right we possess by birth. It is ours. It is part of our humanity. Folks, the Heller decision is crucial. What Heller does is it reaffirms that this individual right cannot be violated by the federal government. Now, is it violated? Sure it is. Sure it is. The federal government doesn't care. The Democrats in particular. I shouldn't say the federal government doesn't care. There are members of that government that care very much, but there are also members in the Democrat Party who could care less. They want to take your guns. They simply do. And they've shown that, especially since the October 1, 2017 Las Vegas shooting. They've just come right out and made pretty clear their animosity, not simply to what they call quote unquote weapons of war, but against just plain semi-automatic rifles. They want to take your guns. And so it's important that we understand that they don't have that power. They don't have that authority. I should say authority, because they may fake the power, but they don't have the authority. They don't have the moral standing. That's what Heller makes clear, and it's because our right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. And today is such a big day, folks, because today is the 10th anniversary of Heller. It's incredible to think about it, the ramifications of this decision. It's not applied as thoroughly and as much as it should be, but there have been numerous gun controls thrown out because they cannot pass the Heller test. We need more gun controls thrown out for that same reason. And Dick alluded to that as we were speaking. What we need, folks, more than ever right now, we need another Supreme Court justice appointed by Trump. 2 more if we could do it, 2 more. If we could get 1 to 2 more Supreme Court justices, then the application of Heller would be thorough. If we could get 1 to 2 more justices, and if gun owners would show up and vote the way Dick said, if we would do that, we would run the tables on them. And gun control, even gun control in its smallest aspects, would crumble. That's what we must do. I urge you to vote, folks. I urge you to vote. Getting on to some of the news of the day, everything that we have to say is not good, all the news. Despite this being the 10th anniversary of Heller, the Democrats are working hard to take your guns or to make guns inaccessible. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, he wants to put a 700% fee increase on concealed carry permits. What's that going to do? He pushes that as a way to fight crime. What's that going to do? It's not going to fight crime. It is going to make concealed carry cost prohibitive for poorer citizens. He's basically guaranteeing that the Second Amendment will only be a right enjoyed by the rich. When these states push Like they want to push a safety certificate. You have to get a safety certificate before you can buy a gun. And people go, well, that seems reasonable. I don't see why you would be against that. Why does the NRA oppose that? Why does Gun Owners of America oppose that? Why does the Second Amendment Foundation oppose that? It seems reasonable to have to get a safety certificate. Here's why people oppose this garbage. New Jersey, you have to get a handgun purchase permit. In other words, you can't exercise your Second Amendment right to own a handgun for your home until you pay the state $2 for a purchase permit. Well, now Murphy wants to raise that $2 fee to $50. You have to get a firearm identification card in that state. That costs you $5. He wants to raise that fee from $5 to $100. And retail gun dealers, in other words, federally licensed firearm dealers, have to pay $50 to operate in the state. He wants to raise that price to $500. See, here's the problem. Once you give these folks the power to license your rights, you've basically given them the power to tax your rights. And if you've ever met a Democrat, then you know they are not the kind of people who are satisfied with today's tax when tomorrow comes. $2? We're not going to let you get a handgun permit for $2. We're going to up that to $50. $50 for a concealed carry permit? We're not going to let you get a concealed carry permit for $50. We're going to up that to $400. And so they're using regulation as backdoor gun control in New Jersey. And they're going to price you out of the Second Amendment. Why do you people vote for someone like Phil Murphy? I can't figure it. But that's what he's doing in New Jersey. He's in an all-out war with the Second Amendment. Folks, I had an interesting story this week. Some psychologists spoke to President Trump's Federal Commission on School Safety. One of the psychologists was from Stetson University. One was from University of Michigan. They had some disagreement between the two psychologists on how we got here, as far as they were talking about a frequency of a school shooting. One of them said, well, it's because of video games, violence in movies, yada, yada. The other disagreed, saying that that same violence and those same video games are available around the world, and you don't see the same pattern. And then they came to say, you know what, the thing we can't agree on is widespread gun ownership in America. That's the problem, widespread private gun ownership. Well, then one of them broke free, and he didn't get to finish his comments, but he left his written comments to be printed. And he kind of went against himself a little bit. In his written comments, he said, a comparison of the frequency of types of violence in the United States and the United Kingdom is illuminating here. Contrary to what many think, well-done studies have shown that the risk of being violently victimized in the United Kingdom has been higher than in the United States for most years since about 1995. That is true for assault, robbery, rape, and many other violent crimes. Now listen to what he just said. He's sitting here pushing for more gun control in America while admitting that rape and many violent crimes are higher in gun-free UK. This is a buried lead, folks. This is the real story. So you can point fingers at private gun ownership in America all you want, or you can go to gun-free UK where the rate of rape is higher. People can't defend themselves, folks. Now, he goes on to say homicide and firearm assault are higher in the United States than in the UK. I'm going to tell you, this is a hard comparison to make, though, and here's why. The UK virtually banned handgun ownership in 1997. And it is a fact. It's not an opinion. It's a fact that post-1997, they changed their crime reporting so that crime has to reach such a threshold to be reportable that it made crime appear to fall. Like instead of reporting certain stolen items as stolen, they recategorized them as lost property so that they didn't have to report the theft as a crime. And they did that across the board, found ways to lower the way that crime was reported so that it looked like by banning guns, they basically eliminated all types of crime. It's all a facade. But what I'm saying is, this makes it hard when they're saying that the U.S. has this type of crime at a higher level than the U.K. Makes it hard to say that cleanly or to say that simply, because you have to get in there first and say, well, first let's see how many of the crimes that happened in the U.K. were never reported, were never recognized. So it's somewhat of a mess, but it's still very, very telling that this psychologist who is pushing for more gun control, in the very notes he brought to speak to the Federal Commission, he admits that the rate of rape and violent crime is much higher in gun-free UK than in gun-friendly US. We can't ever let that go, folks. It's like one of my heroes, Walt Williams, always said when he would host the Rush Limbaugh show, don't give up your guns. Don't ever give up your guns. And that has to be our determination. We have to be that determined. It is an individual right. It is our right. As we heard when we read from Heller to begin this segment, it is our personal right. We just never give it up. Whether it's a psychologist pushing for it, whether it's a Democrat governor in New Jersey, whether it's a Democrat senator from California named Feinstein, whoever it is, to take away our rights. We just politely make clear, sorry, we're not going to give up our rights. Just not going to happen. So you might as well move on and talk about something else. Folks, you're listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. We'll be back right after this. Hey folks, I want to tell you about Breitbart News' Second Amendment newsletter, Downrange with AWR Hawkins. Features the top gun stories of the week, every week, and guest columnists like Gun Owners of America's Larry Pratt or Armed American Radio's Mark Walters. Also features a review of a firearm or a firearm accessory each week. The newsletter downloads on Thursday, comes right to your email inbox. You can subscribe at Breitbart.com/AWR.
This is Bullets with AWR Hawkins, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is AWR Hawkins.
Welcome back to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. Folks, going to transition now to our third segment where we'll cover examples of the Second Amendment in action over the last week. And before I do, I want to give a shout out. I should have written down all the names, but I had a lot of emails and texts from some of you guys telling me, wishing me well and hoping I'd feel better. And I still have a little cough, but man, I feel a lot better than I did last week when I did the podcast. Again, I'm sorry for how horrible I sounded. But I get bronchitis about once a year, and if I don't hop right on it when I get it, I tend to run into the danger of getting pneumonia. And I got pretty close, in my opinion, on this one. I had to take a number of different medicines. Probably had to take a combination of medicines I've never had to take this time to get rid of it. It had me down for a while. But anyway, thank you for all the well wishes. I just wanted to say that. I always appreciate my correspondence with you guys, and always keep it up. Send pics, send stories, send whatever. AWR Hawkins at Breitbart.com. We had an auto repair owner in Temple City, California. His shop had been robbed, and tens of thousands of dollars worth of diagnostic equipment had been stolen. And he said he just had a hunch, because the people who robbed him were able to get in and out without any ramifications, that he had a hunch they'd be coming back. So he and his handgun slept in the business, just decided he was going to start doing that so he would be there. Well, the people surely did come back, or at least two other robbery suspects came back. Whether they were the first two or not, I'm not sure, but they came back, and they used a pry bar. Pry opened his front door. The noise of them doing that awoke him, and the video is just exceptional. As they're coming through the front door, one of them is just into the store, and the glass around him starts shattering as he opens fire. And then one of the suspects falls to the ground because he's hit. And this is how brave those burglars are. The one that falls to the ground starts crying. Asked the store owner to call his wife. Call my wife for me. And then looks at the store owner and says, why did you shoot me? Why did I shoot you? You just entered my business using a pry bar to get the door open. Why did I shoot you? Awesome. awesome story. The owner of the store had a lot of good comments to make. We can't cover all of them, but he just had some comments that were next level. You could tell he's not limited by political correctness. He said, look, if you're thinking about breaking into a business, this is what he said, don't do it. Get a job. You never know what's behind that door. And isn't that the truth? These two suspects had no idea what was behind the door. I will guarantee you it never entered their mind that an armed store owner was behind the door. It never entered their mind. But guess what? He was. Anyway, it's a glorious story. And folks, it is brought to you by the Second Amendment. We covered the story out of Tumwater, Washington, where the carjacker, he had carjacked a number of cars. He eventually went into a Walmart in Tumwater. He shot up a ammunition display case to access more ammo. He walked out of the store. He was followed out by two concealed carry permit holders, one of whom shot and killed him in the parking lot. And we covered that story of how an armed citizen saved the day. But what we found out later in the week about the armed citizen is that he was a pastor. A pastor. And he said that shooting that man was an outgrowth of his role as pastor and father. His name is Pastor David George. He followed the man into the parking lot, and he said when he got in the parking lot, he figured out what the guy was doing. The guy was trying to take a car. If someone wouldn't get out of it, the guy would just shoot at him. And when George realized lives were in danger, he followed the guy closely, but it said he was waiting for a chance to shoot where no innocence would be endangered. That's such an important point, because the left always presents gun owners as just some kind of crazy-eyed hayseed, can't wait to pull the trigger. No, here is George walking behind the man at a safe distance, waiting for the opportunity to shoot where no one will be endangered. He had got that opportunity when the man finally got a car he could carjack. As he was climbing into it, George opened fire, striking the man, identified as Tim Day. Day fell out of the car after being struck, and that was it. Ball game. Day is done, which is how it should be. What a great, great story. Folks, it's the Second Amendment in action. It's how it should work. Folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. This week we had a home invader in Geneva County, Alabama. Came up, started beating on a woman's door, a female homeowner. He's beating on her door, apparently trying to gain access. She tells him to go away. She warns him. She's armed. She's letting him know he won't go away. She finally shoots. Anyway, they rushed him to the hospital, where they eventually put him in a sack because he was pronounced dead. This woman was in a remote area. The sheriff said it was a remote area. When you think about a woman home alone in a remote area, and those of you who are listening who are women, you know I'm not putting you down, but it's just a fact that a man can overpower a woman in almost every case. And you add to that he's already angry enough. He's beating on that door. He's doing whatever. He gets in that house. The things he might do are beyond words, that we don't even want to think about them. And she's able to level the playing field because she has a firearm. And I shouldn't even say level the playing field. She's allowed to control the playing field because she puts it on him. And that's it. Ball game. This story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. So, folks, this is how the Second Amendment works. It's how it works out in real life. And as I say every week, when the Democrats push these little mambly-pambly gun controls, all we want to do is put a fee on a handgun purchase permit so that you have to meet a certain safety standard to own a handgun. When they do that, they're pricing you out of your Second Amendment. You don't agree to that. No, we're not going to go along with that. We are not going to go along with that. Because, folks, when you hear these stories I'm reading, what you're hearing, these are the stories of Americans who own firearms the way our founders intended, and they're using those firearms to defend their life and liberty. One other story, folks, in Atlanta, a neighbor in a neighborhood heard a woman outside screaming. He grabs his firearm, he goes out there. He grabs his handgun, he goes out there. When he gets out there, he finds a pregnant pizza delivery woman being beaten with the butt of a rifle by 2 or 3 suspects. He said that when he walks up close, one of the suspects turns around and has a gun in his hand. Now, here is a quote. The neighbor's name is Dennis Medeiros. Here's what Medeiros said. When I came around the corner there, I saw 3 people were beating on this lady. One of them had a gun. One of them turned around and had the gun in his hand. I told him, drop the gun or I will drop you. And they threw the gun down and all 3 of them took off. Police captured one of the suspects. But here's the bottom line. That neighbor saved that woman's life. Perhaps that woman and her child's life. I don't know the condition of the unborn child. I don't know if that's the area of her body on which these heathens were beating her or not. But I'll tell you this. That armed neighbor saved the day. Folks, it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? It's a beautiful thing. Now, to link back to that story I covered in the second segment where the psychologist is pushing for more gun control in the U.S. while at the same time admitting a higher rate of rape and violent crime in gun-free U.K., what would that pizza delivery woman have done had she been in the U.K.? Think about what I'm going to say. What I'm going to say is cruel. It's inhumane, but it's true. If she had been in the UK, she would have been at the mercy of those 3 assaulters. She would have been at their mercy. And that neighbor could have come out and risked his life to fight them bare knuckle, but he would have been outgunned because they already had a gun. Criminals will always have guns. So that pregnant pizza delivery woman would have been at the mercy of those 3 suspects had that attack happened in the UK. And folks, this story is brought to you by the Second Amendment. Rewind to the woman I covered who was home alone in a remote area of Alabama. And the guy's beating on her door trying to get in. She warns him, and then she shoots him and kills him. But take away her gun. Put her in gun-free UK. What happens to her? Because he will eventually get through that door, and if he can't get through the door, he's coming through a window. Then what happens to her? Right? Or go back to the carjacker in Walmart. What happens when that pastor follows that carjacker, but the only tool that pastor has is a cell phone? That carjacker gets in that last car and he leaves the scene. And whoever he shot has just been shot. And he will shoot whoever he shoots because criminals will always have the guns they need. And that particular criminal stole the handgun he used that day. He stole it. So if they had been in the gun-free UK, that pastor would not have been able to stop that carjacker. All right? I mean, and that is crucial. It's crucial that these things come full circle in your mind, that you understand them. Think about the automobile shop owner or repair shop owner. Where would he have been if he had been in gun-free UK? He'd been stupid to sleep in his store. What's he going to do? Sleep in his store with a baseball bat? No, his store, he would just have to be willing to have his store pillaged, just be pillaged by animals. The right to keep and bear arms is so central to the American experience. We can never give it up. We can never allow it to be restricted or further restricted for sure. And we have to constantly push for a repeal of these silly gun controls that already limit our freedom to a degree that is unacceptable. Plan on voting this November 18th. Vote for people who are pro-Second Amendment. It's time to be a single-issue voter in my mind. Pro-Second Amendment. Folks, you've been listening to Bullets with AWR Hawkins. It's a Breitbart News podcast where we focus on guns and gun rights, Second Amendment. Have all your friends, your coworkers, your family members, your neighbors, have them subscribe to the podcast. And after they subscribe, have them get back there to the opening page and give us a review. We need all the 5-star reviews we can get. The podcast downloads for free every Tuesday on your iPhone. You can get it on your Android as well. Until we're together again, just always keep in mind, more guns equal more freedom.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
A lot of people not knowing what action they could or should take to make the difference. What I do is try to turn people on to sites like Breitbart, people who are writing and publishing the truth so that people will get educated. But, you kind of can't blame productive members of society who are kind of confused, perplexed as to what do we do to take this government back.
Sirius XM Patriot, Channel 125.